Hello, everybody. This is Matthew Brown. Welcome to the Man of Creek podcast. Today, I am talking about the Amir Locke shooting. It's a tragedy, and it really hits close to home for me. Now, for anybody unfamiliar with what happened, essentially there was a young man who was asleep on the couch. I think he was staying at uh, a cousin's place. The police were looking for a man involved in the murder. They burst into There were multiple family members living in this apartment complex, so they went into three different apartments, and he happened to be on one of the couches asleep. And when they did a no knock warrant, essentially they opened the door and hurry up and announce themselves, in a huge surprise, right? Wake him up on the couch, and then he's sleeping there with his firearm next to him, and he picks it up. They say he pointed it at him. From the little part of the video I can see, it just seems more along the lines that he, you know, pulled it out. But the video didn't give the video that I watched didn't go like in extreme detail and whatever. So it is quite possible that it may have flagged one of the police officers. But as far as I know, none of the police officers were shot. He was shot multiple times and died. And the reason this hits very close to home for me, and I can, I see where this can be so many people's situations. This is why I don't like no knock warrants. Uh, it, but it hits close to me because when I was younger, I spent a lot of my time with family, living part of my time with family who lived on the east side of the Detroit area, not in Detroit, but just outside in a town that, and I'm not gonna name the town, but in a town that didn't, with a lot of black people, but the city never really seemed to like black people. Even to this day, it's kind of known for being a city that comes under fire a lot for not really getting along with a lot of its residents. Strangely enough, because a lot of the towns in Metro Detroit, most of them aren't really having race issues, right? Like this particular one. But that's outside of it. It's not like I'm not saying that on the level that I had a bunch of issues race wise. I'm just giving that note out where it's so close. And my my whole family lived in this apartment complex. Everybody in my family pretty much lived in a different area of this apartment complex. I loved it because I can go from one cousin's house to another cousin's house to my grandma's house to my dad's house to, apartment. But you get my point. I could just go back and forth and see all my family whenever I like to, and when I couldn't, I was kind of sad. But I spent a lot of time there. Right, a lot of my younger years there, and I will say that I may or have had a family or two, a family member or two that lived outside of the law. Not as bad as whatever was going on with his brother or whatever, or sorry, his cousin. But regardless, when you commit these no knock warrants, right, you get a lot of these situations where you don't know what's going on inside the house. What they're trying to do is they're trying to get a tactical advantage. One, to prevent the destruction of evidence, and two, if the person, obviously, if they're knocking on the door of someone they assume is a murderer, he's willing to do something egregious. He may, turn his sights on them in his uh, intention to escape punishment or whatever the case may be. So I understand it tactically. However, this is why it's extremely important that you consider who may be in the house when it's done. There was a case in Detroit where there was a man, I believe he shot a person at a bus stop, went home. There was a his mother and his daughter were at the house, and they rushed in the house, right? They did some type of tactical I would say maybe a no-knock warrant or something, raided the house, whatever you want to call it. And the grandmother, if you're from the Detroit area, you're probably familiar with this story. The grandmother grabbed a gun and ended up shooting the young daughter, right, of the perpetrator, right. Now, it's understandable that they barge into the house with, family, but I don't think the grandmother grabbed the gun in a huge attempt to fight off the police. You're bashing in someone's house with a gun, and that's a lot of times all they see. A lot of people also don't understand. A lot of these times, these SWAT people, they may be covering their faces. They may not be very good at identifying their police. And many people, if they live in a bad enough area, may have had people pretend to be police to get into their house before. What's common in one, or what's very rare in one area, or non-heard of in one area, can be very common in another area. If there are a lot of home invasions in certain areas, it's also very common for people to barge in and want to pretend that they are the police. Right, that is something, because a lot of areas don't have home invasions. A lot of home invasions are people coming in the homes of bad guys, right? So I don't want to say they're good guys coming in the home of bad guys, but what it is one bad guy and another bad guy, opportunistic crimes. They think something's at the house that they want. But a lot of home invasions also occur when you live in a big city, and I think a lot of the self-defense community is mostly older white men from the suburbs. So sometimes they don't get this. I'm not saying all of them. It's just a reality that a lot of them have not lived in the big dangerous area of a city for extended periods of time. So what happens a lot of times in the city is everybody on the block knows you. And if you start doing good, it's that awkward growth phase. You may start being a completely moral person, working hard, trying to get ahead. And there's a Dave Chappelle skit that actually makes fun of this. He gets a job he calls it Whack Arnold's, starts making money, and every time he comes home, they rob him. And I thought, when I saw that, that was kind of funny. I also thought that was incredibly true. When they rag on you when you're not doing good, but as soon as you start doing good, they're like, man, let's start robbing him. Because if you're, focused on your future, it's a good chance you may not be about that life. Now, sometimes they find out otherwise. These robbers, they find out otherwise. And that's what goes on a lot of times in these self-defense situations. But other times, what's going on is there's very common things, they know you have something they want, just because from knowing you. You may have had friends come over and play video games, right? And from those friends who come over to play video games, now they know you have a PS5 and they want your PS5. These scenarios are not as outrageous as people think. It's just that they don't get reported on very often, right? Some dude comes up and be like, hey, some guys busted in and got my PS5. And the police are like, and a lot of people be like, what are you talking about? And like, they burst in the house while he was there and stole his, and it depends on what area you're at. You may get an and, so what? Not much we can do about it. Okay, file a report. We'll look at it never. I'm not saying that police don't care. Sometimes they could be swamped. But a lot of these situations are set up primarily to make things, I don't want to say easier for police, but they're safer for police, but less safe for the people whose homes they're bursting into, right? The police get the optimal out of the situation. Think of the Miami-Dade shooting. No, not the really horrible one where all the police, got harmed, and the old school one, right, that changed all the different police tactics, right? Not that one. I mean the one with the UPS driver where they went into a shootout to stop the thieves of the UPS truck. They were using other people's civilian cars as cover. The UPS truck is getting shot up. The guy who they were holding hostage in the UPS. I may be saying maybe it wasn't, maybe it was a different type of server, but I think it was UPS. But regardless, the guy who was being held hostage, right, that they were maybe trying to save, he's dead. Um, Not unlikely from police fire, right? These are things that people look at and they're like, hey, you know, when in situations like that, he almost feel like he might have been better off with the robbers. If at least they would have let him go, there might have been less risk of collateral damage. You know, you're going to open a shootout in the middle of the freeway with all these different people, or the middle of a highway, regardless, with all these people around. What's the end goal here? To save lives, or to stop, to protect and serve, or to stop the bad guy? What is the end goal with all of these, right? The guy who murdered a person, absolutely, absolutely, he should have been arrested. But did they think that his family was in danger from him? Did they think he was holding someone hostage in the house? Could they have waited for him to come out? Is there really no other tactic that could have been used? And I'm not a police officer. I don't mean the question, but a lot of times you bring these questions up and police are like, well, why don't you join and change the system? You know, they can't even change the system. They're already in there. So it's not a huge insult to police officers. But what, I'm that's a genuine question. Are there better tactics that they can apply? Do they have to be so forceful? The man who died because he had he wasn't healthy, and then they tackled him down just because he had headphones in his ear. He couldn't hear what they were saying. Then he ends up in a ambulance, and then they give their diagnosis to the ambulance crew, so and resulting in his death. Right? Are there not better tactics that can be used? And a lot of people say, well, the police just need better training. Okay, well, then you need to figure out something else to do in the meantime till they get better training. Everybody doesn't need to suffer because they don't get better training. And I also want to say, just a note, the police, that's a kind of a setup question or a trick answer. Or you have trick questions, that's a trick answer because there's never going to be enough training. There's no department or intelligent group of police or police department that says our department has sufficient training, right? It's enough training. They don't need any more. We're good to go, right? They'll always say they need more training because the training is one is used as a scapegoat, and two, yes, of course you always need more training. So that's not an excuse. I get that they can need more training. There's no problem, but that's not an excuse, right? They get plenty of funding, right? Not as much funding as they feel like they need, and I completely understand that. But they get enough funding to choose tactics. It's the policies that are bad. And what looked like happened with this policy is the Minneapolis mayor or whoever, and it looks like they're pointing fingers at the mayor, decided that he used really loose terming. So he got rid of no-knock warrants without getting rid of no-knock warrants, right? He says they don't have to knock, they can burst in, they just have to say they're police once they're in there. They pretty much did that anyway, and it's very loose. What time do they have to announce that they're police, right? It seems like with a lot of these policies and tactics, all the burden is placed on the citizens to know how to act, to be mindful, to be aware of everything that's going on, to know how to behave when a policeman bursts in your house, right? People should not be expected to have to do all that. The police are the ones who are employed. They're the ones with the training. Citizens should not be expected to have optimal level training. When people are like, oh, you should know better, or you should know better, or that's your fault because, you didn't. If I was in that situation, no, you don't. You don't know anything. You've never been in that situation, right? You do not know what you're going to do in that situation till you get in that situation. Period. All the training in the world really goes out the window because, like Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. You may get punched in the face by somebody who hit so hard you didn't know they could hit that hard. They look smaller than you. Now your whole day's just, confused. A lot of times you don't even know what's going on. It takes you a second to be like, wait, is this really happening? Right? And all the tactics you may have employed and practiced and followed all to those days doesn't apply in a particular situation. Right? I'll give you an example. When I was younger, God, I can't believe I can say that now. A younger adult. Huh. Anyway, so when I was a younger adult, Brazil, well, I guess it still is, but the Jujitsu, the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, grappling martial arts started to get really popular. And they're good for sports, and they can be good for certain self-defense situations. But in a lot of street fighting applications, they're sometimes not as good. The reason being is a lot of times people like to jump you, right? They're not looking for a fair fight. So there may be, Tim and Bobby. Okay, you can grapple Tim, but Bobby's going to start kicking you in the head while you're busy tied up with Tim. And this is something that didn't follow through with a lot of people. And I've seen a lot of people pretty much get the daylight stomped out of them because it's just not something they thought about at the moment when it happened. Right, a lot of these warn against the big bad wolf scenario. You can look at some of my other stuff to understand what that is. But basically, a lot of people think there's a very specific scenario they're going to be in when these things are random occurrences in general. Right, or play Skyrim, you have a random NPC encounter. Right, it's kind of like that. You do not know what's going to happen. Right, you can assume what you may run into, but that may not be the case. So, you have to have some tactics of your own, something to follow through with, get a plan. Unfortunately, it seems like this man, he was driving Lyft, he was doing Uber or something, and he was following through with his protection, and the police botched what they did. And now they're calling for this police officer to be fired. Do I think he should be fired? Honestly, it's a complicated thing, because I believe his job put him in a very poor situation, but it also resulted in something very terrible happening to somebody that could have been prevented. I mean, it's just that's their go-to. A lot of times, firing is their go-to. When you're carrying a firearm, you're advised that is your last resort. Clearly, with them, a lot of times, it's their first resort. And you, as a citizen, are, for some reason, seemingly considered secondary when it comes to the officer's safety. But I don't know. You let me know what you think. What do you think? Is there a different tactic that they can employ that can make people safer instead of doing these no-knock warrants? Because I'm not for no-knock warrants at all. But it almost seems like this one, in the case of a no-knock warrant, makes it apply because he was considered dangerous. Like, this wasn't somebody who was trying to get rid of weed. Right? This wasn't somebody who was trying to avoid bail. This wasn't somebody who was, trying to flush some cocaine or whatever the case may be. Because even if you have drugs and guns and whatever the rigmarole is, right? This isn't even somebody who just, let's say beat somebody to death or stab somebody. This is somebody who apparently murdered somebody with a gun. So, that being said, it seems like it's understandable that they raided the house, or raided the apartment, right? Because they're raiding 3 apartments because they don't want anybody giving him a heads up. I see what they did, but is there another tactic you could think of that might make things safer for everybody? Once again, I'm questioning, could they had just wait till he walked out the door, right? Could they have somebody undercover, sneak up and grab him, you know, when, one day when he's out and about? Wait for a little bit longer. It's just my thought. But you let me know what you think. Maybe there's something you think of. Do you think that these no knock warrants are absolutely necessary? I'd like to hear your opinion. All right, peace.